Welcome to the 2017 Candidates Forum, sponsored by the Wallingford Community Women. I'm Jean McFarland, the program moderator. This segment features the candidates running for mayor. The format will be as follows. The first part of the program will consist of questions asked of the candidates by members of the local media, including the New Haven Register and the Record Journal, as well as students from Lyman Hall High School and Mark T. Sheehan High School. The second part will allow each candidate to make a closing statement. During the question and answer portion of the program, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. The opposing candidate will be allowed 1 minute for rebuttal. To conclude the program, the candidates will have 3 minutes to make closing remarks. Prior to the program, a flip of the coin determined the order of questioning. We will begin with Jared Liu. Before beginning the questioning, I'd like to introduce the candidates running for mayor. They are William Dickinson, Republican, and Jared Liu, Democrat. Luther Turmel from the New Haven Register, will you please ask the first question of Jared Liu?
Jared, what changes, if any, would you make to the way the town handles economic development?
Great question. Well, let me start off by thanking the Wallingford Community Women and the folks who are up here. Let me also start by thanking the NFL for not having any New England or New York teams on Thursday Night Football. That was the first thing that I thought of when I saw this debate was scheduled for Thursday. I thought, oh, no one's going to tune in if there's a game on. So passive thanks to the NFL. So economic development is, I would say, the top priority that I'm running on. Of the many things that this town does, economic development has to be the most important. I would also like to recognize the things that we do well. We have a lot of fantastic businesses in the downtown. Every single person who is running for office, I'm confident, is running because they love Wallingford. I think the downtown has changed, unfortunately, though. So when I think back to some of the businesses that used to be populating the downtown when I was a kid, they were places like Bolio Sports, Simpson's Pharmacy, Sprasky Shoes. Probably many of you remember some of these same things. We had a movie theater downtown. They were businesses that were owned by Wallingford people, and that was a huge difference. I think when we just approach business as someone who pays into the tax base, we end up with pawn shops and vape shops. We end up with things that we don't want. So I would say, for lack of having a longer response time, the most important thing we can do is plan for what we want in the downtown. One of the things that I've included in my plan is that we need to include more voices. I'm concerned that we've gotten to the point where we believe we know what we're doing, we believe that we don't need to listen to other people, and we've ended up with an insular mentality. I think Councillor Marone actually put it best when he said, Wallingford is hemorrhaging businesses. That's the truth. It is not enough to say how many we're gaining, how many we're losing. It's a quality of business that we're looking for.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, I think the town has a very good economic development program. Some 25 new businesses have opened their doors in the first 6 months of this year, 2017. They work closely, that is the Economic Development Commission, all volunteers, work closely with WCI, Wallingford Center Inc., which obviously is very involved in the downtown. But it's a program that goes way beyond the downtown. It really reaches well into our industrial parks, and they work with our utilities to make sure that we are providing the kinds of services and the welcome that businesses seek.
Thank you. Lila Pickering from Sheehan High School, will you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
Good evening. What is your stance on having higher security or officers in schools around Wallingford?
Did you ask what is my position regarding officers in the schools?
Yes.
Yes. I think that is a proper course where there's a showing of need for it. a policeman in a school has criminal arrest authority, so that where there's an altercation that could be handled in ways that would not involve an arrest and the intrusion of criminal law into behavior, the police officer is not going to handle the issue that way. So if we have sufficient cause with incidents of a nature and a frequency that would require police officers to be present, certainly I believe the police department would seriously consider the placement of officers in the schools. But otherwise, they are trained professionals, and we really need them to make everyone safe in the community. So at the point we have to dedicate them just to the schools, we have a serious problem that I don't believe we have at this time.
Thank you. Audrey,
I get to respond?
yes, you are. You do. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Actually, won't disagree much with the mayor on that. I think that's spot on. The moment that we have police in our schools, it is really a measure of where we have come to as a community. I think there are a few things that we should be looking at. One is, for starters, this is something where, a lot of the statutory authority falls to the superintendent for this. We need to be partnering closely with the superintendent on what would the problems be that might necessitate that if he's the one who's asking for that. I've had a lot of conversations with the police chief in particular around this. And I will tell you, a question came up earlier about, is the police force understaffed? And as we got into the questions, some of what we'd like to do, if we have officers who are walking the beat, who are part of your neighborhood, who are integrated into that fabric, who are doing more than just slapping on the cuffs, but are part of the community fabric, that requires a different level of force. And that was something that I was really heartened to see that Chief Wright was really in tune with, let's turn the force into something that is not responsive, but something that is proactive. And I think the same goes for in the schools.
Thank you. Audrey Larson from Lyman Hall High School, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
What is the kind of image that you would like Wallingford to portray?
Thanks, Audrey. That's a great question. I hope many people out in Wallingford know that the theme of my campaign has been 06492 Rocks. I think this is a great town to live in, and really one of the things that I've tried to promote through the entire campaign are the reasons that we live in Wallingford. There are so many things that we love about this place. Sort of even as I scan the audience, I'll say it's really heartening to see the DeGenovas here. I probably spent tremendous amount of time when I was a child in their house growing up with their children. That's something that when I think about what a fantastic town Wallingford is, it doesn't come into political party divides. It comes into how we relate to one another as a community. So some of the things that I love about Wallingford are some of those businesses that we frequent. There are things like the trees that are spread throughout the town. Think about the magnificent beech tree that's in front of the Library Bistro. Think about the way that committed citizens step up to lead. Some of the most heartening conversations I've had have been with people like the Wallingford Youth Soccer and Little League, who have said, we have approached the town at our own expense to care for the fields because our athletes are starting to get injured, because the town's no longer maintaining those fields. We want to be doing those things. People step up repeatedly to really go to bat for this town because they love this community. So I would start with the people, but I'd really say this is a fantastic place to be.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, I would agree. It is a good community to live in. I would hope our image is one of friendliness, of caring, of welcome to all people of all different opinions and lifestyles. We have a lot to offer. We want Wallingford to be a place where a person is proud to say, that's my hometown. No place is perfect, but we have so many volunteer organizations all working together to make it a great place that we can't help but be successful.
Thank you. Matt Zabarek from the Record Journal, would you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
In the past, some people have criticized the town's budgeting practices by saying expenditures are overestimated and revenues are underestimated. Can you just, I guess, do you think the town needs to make any changes to the way it budgets to improve its budgeting practices going forward?
Well, you asked me to accept your premise that
Well, I guess
there's
just
a problem.
defend the way the town budgets
Which-
every year.
Which I do not accept that premise, there's a problem. I think if we look at other layers of government, other communities, we don't suffer from some of the problems on a financial level that they suffer from. You will never have zeros, balance out at zeros. You will either have deficits or you'll have money left over. I think most people, and there are people in such dire straits that they cannot plan beyond the next day. But if you have the luxury of being able to plan, you really need to put money aside. And whether it's a replacement of a stove or put a roof on or buying another car, you need to put money aside for those things. Well, government is no different. As an elected official, I really feel we are asked to be fiduciaries. And a fiduciary has to act with prudence and care. We're dealing with other people's money. So at the point we end up with no money left over and the emergency occurs, and then we're faced with borrowing funds and a desperate search for an answer, we haven't managed the public's money in a way that should be managed. We want people to feel proud of the community, the way it's managed, and feel that there is that confidence and trust in the decision-making for those who are asked to manage the public assets. So we seek to have that ability to respond to emergencies and have money in the bank to reassure people, both at an auditor level as well as the individual here in town, that we're looking out for them and planning for our future.
Mr. Liu?
So something that I would credit the mayor with is that he hasn't spent money wantonly. I think it's one of the reasons that Wallingford's in as good financial shape as it is. But I disagree that the way the town budgets should be equivalent to the way that you personally budget yourself. If at the end of the week, at the end of the month, you end up with $100, $1,000, whatever your budget is, if you end up with money in the bank at the end of the month, that's a good thing for you. It allows you to go out to dinner. It allows you to contribute to your retirement savings. That is not the business that the town government is in. The town government is in the business of asking you for exactly the amount of money, and exactly, I think that's exactly right. You're not going to land it exactly at zero, but at the point where for 34 years you have increased the surplus because every year you have underestimated expenses and you've overestimated income, there's a problem there. It would be like if I came to you and asked you for $150 more this year, simply so I could put it in a rainy day fund. That might be responsible to do, but I guarantee every single one of you would say, no thank you, because you have something else that you can do with your money.
Thank you. Lila Pickering, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
Good evening. Would you support more or less spending of the budget to go to education?
Great question. So, want to be careful on all education questions that there is statutory authority that's given to the superintendent and the Board of Education. But the mayor and town council obviously do have direct authority for the budget. One of the things that really concerns me from an educational perspective is that we are doing the equivalent of straining the gnats and swallowing the camel. Essentially, we are so hyper-focused on the small things that we are missing the larger issues. Think about that we were the second and the last town in this state to have full-day kindergarten. Simply because, from a leadership perspective, the town stepped back and said, we're not opposed to it if you find it in your budget. Well, I think that's not really being a leader. I would say the same thing goes to your question about STEM education. I'm worried that we spend so much time and so many resources, because we have to, on keeping kids from failing, that we're losing track of that. There are so many talented students who are focused on getting ready for college, who are focused on job readiness, who need those STEM programs and the maker spaces in order to move to the next level. And I would love to task the superintendent and the Board of Ed with coming to the mayor, with coming to the town council and saying, here's what we'd like, and here's what we're going to measure. Here's what you're going to get out of it. We're going to hold them accountable. You don't get something for nothing. But I think STEM education is a very important one where, if I can tell you from the conversations that I've had with the Board of Education and the superintendent, they are savvy to it and they are ready with those plans.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Would you support more or less spending of the budget to go to education?
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
couldn't tell what you were saying.
Would you support more or less spending of the budget to go to education?
Okay, thank you. I think affordability has to be a part of the equation. I think one of the problems we're having in government in general is affordability doesn't play a big enough role. So there are a lot of good ideas in a lot of areas, whether it's education or other services, but it's necessary to determine what is affordable. The town of Wallingford relies upon $20 to $21 million out of a $100 million school budget upon the state of Connecticut. And we're faced with real issues over whether we will receive that money or not. So affordability has to be part of an equation. We may not be able to afford everything we would like, but we certainly want to provide a very good education.
Thank you. Audrey, would you please ask William Dickinson the next question?
Mr. Dickinson, what do you think is Wallingford's biggest economic issue and how would you address it?
Our biggest economic issue, I believe, is the vulnerability we have on relying upon state money. That's the biggest one right now. As I just indicated, we're probably relying upon anywhere from $20 to $25 million out of a $160 million budget. So that's a real vulnerability in difficult times, because whether we receive that money or not becomes a real political football. To the degree to which we can protect ourselves from that vulnerability, I think we need to seriously think about that. We will be analyzing what the new state budget is, and hopefully we will be able to adapt over the coming years. But that's a primary issue. The second issue is the state of the economy in general in Connecticut. And unless that economy really begins to turn around, we're having businesses leave. So our grand list is not increasing. A grand list is the taxable property. So if businesses don't move into the community, there's no new taxes that will be paid. Without that increase, then all of the taxpayers are still here would have to have an increased tax bill in order to spend more money. So two parts. One is state aid, and other is the grand list issue. We need to pursue measures that will improve Connecticut overall, and certainly Wallingford must continue its efforts to attract good businesses, big businesses to our community, and we have a very active program to do that.
Mr. Liu?
Thank you. I would like to challenge the audience tonight to, every time you hear the mayor point the finger at the state, think about what could have been done to reflect backwards. I will tell you, in my career, having worked in finance and for-profit industry for many years, you first self-reflect and you think about, what could I have done differently? Let's even think about the budget. What could we have done differently? Well, we could have applied for some of these state grants that we're eligible for. We could have actually applied them correctly so we didn't have to refund the money. From an investments perspective, did you know that our investment funds and the pensions often come in 10% under what the market is? We probably would have been better just to invest it in index funds. And even in years where the market loses, we end up losing too. I would say there are things that from a financial perspective, we are missing the boat on. I think the answer to your question, I think it's attracting, retaining the businesses that we desire. Again, think about the businesses that used to be here when I was a kid, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Very different businesses. We need to be proactive in going after those businesses and then having a self-reflective process that asks, how do we keep you here?
Thank you. Matt, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
Jared, you said that if you're elected, you're committed to making Community Pool profitable within, I think you said, 8 years. I guess, what specific measures would you propose to make Community Pool profitable again?
Great, thanks, Matt. So community pool is an important fabric of this town, not just because I spent many of my summers there and I loved it, and certainly when I came to the town council meeting and they were debating it, and many of them had had a similar experience, but because it actually used to be a net positive for this town. There are lots of different ways to look at the numbers. I like to think about it in terms of the number of tags, right? Because regardless of how you look at it after that, we are hemorrhaging people who go to community pool. So about 8 years ago, we were selling 5,000 tags. This year, we sold just under 2,000. I think it was about 1,800 tags. Regardless of how you look at it, what we were charging for the tag cost then, that's a huge differential in terms of the revenue we're getting. So I think this is sort of a phase one and a phase two. Phase one is, let's get community pool back to the point where it is a net zero. So what do we have to do to get back to 5,000 tags? Well, we saw from the town council meeting, John Golick made no bones about this, that the biggest drop-off was after the near drowning, and when we shut out the people from out of town, when we forced people to go down to Parks and Rec to literally get their pictures taken, every single one of them, and pay by cash or check only. We got to the point where we were worse than the DMV. That's a real marker for us. We were turning people away. So get the pool passes online, let people pay by credit card, let them upload their own pictures. Now let's think about generating revenue. We can start selling advertisements. Let's get back to generating concessions. Let's make day passes available. We haven't invested anything at this point. We've just done the little tweaks that allow people to take advantage of what they love. Phase two is, let's pull out that plan. John Golick actually has a plan. He's circulated to the town council. He's had it in the works for years, but he's being shut out. The plan is there. Now, is it going to be free? No. It might cost $3 or $4 million, and it has some of the amenities that we like. But now that's a conversation in phase two for what we're going to get out of that and how that will generate revenue. But phase one and phase two.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Community pool is a wonderful asset, but again, you have to analyze it against the financial challenges that we face across the board. The pool costs in the vicinity of $140,000 operating expense every year. So you can increase the number of passes, but you would have to increase the cost per pass. Mr. Golick indicated there were problems with concession stands. For a variety of reasons, they didn't work out. Maybe they could be fixed, but it is somewhat doubtful given the nature of the problems. We haven't turned our back on community pool, but I don't believe the pool was ever a revenue maker to the extent that it paid for the cost of providing the facility.
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
Mayor Dickinson, in a piece of your collateral campaign material, one of the achievements that you cite is the use of first responders using Narcan. And there's been some criticism in social media claiming that this was something that you initially had sought much further study rather than going ahead right away with it. Do you think it's appropriate for your administration to claim credit for the first responders using Narcan just because it happened during the past 2-year term?
Well, whatever occurs, I'm either part of it or not. The police department, first of all, the fire department always carried Narcan. And in Wallingford, the police department is not a first responder for medical issues. It is fire department. In many communities, the police department is the first responder. And in those communities, they were carrying Narcan. Now, Narcan requires some pretty rigid rules to be followed. People have to be trained in the use of it. It has a shelf life, so you've got to replace it. It's not a simple thing. So the police department looked into what were those rules and could they accommodate that as part of their routine. Ultimately, they arrived at the conclusion that yes, they would be able to do it upon their review of that and upon their acceptance of it. Certainly at that point, I was supportive of us proceeding in that direction. But it was never a case of there not being Narcan in the community, and it was never a case of us saying, no, that will never happen. But anytime you assign a new duty to a department, you need to provide the due diligence and make sure that they are able to carry it out in a manner that is professional and provides the response that you desire.
Mr. Liu?
So let me say first thank you to the Coalition for Better Wallingford, who is really leading on this issue. This is Red Ribbon Week for anyone who doesn't know. Please get involved with their activities. You know, I think the mayor did come to finally making the right decision, and I want to applaud him for that. But I think it's a really tough sell to the folks who were in crisis during that time period to essentially have the message, sorry about your child, sorry about your loved one. This took me 2 or 3 years in order to research this. You know, sometimes as a leader you need to be a little bit more nimble than that. I think, you know, it goes beyond even just, you know, what do our law enforcement officers and first responders carry? You know, there's another level deeper there, which is, you know, we should be asking the questions with what got them to this point. You know, is it depression? Is it that they're unemployed? You know, and my fear is that, you know, if we're going to keep people from going down this very dark road, the town is not equipped to be asking these questions if they're going to drag their feet simply on Narcan being carried.
Thank you. Audrey, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
What is the importance of supporting transportation changes in our town regarding our railroad?
What is the importance of it? My goodness. So we got a gift from the state. The state built for us this new train station. And they were very savvy in how they negotiated a few things. You all might have seen in a very recent article in the Record Journal that they've now published what the price is going to be. They got Amtrak to agree to accept whatever price CT Rail set, and it's under $5 to get to New Haven. And so now, if you're a commuter and you want to go to New York City, you can pick up the Metro North. You can get into New Haven because not only is it going to be inexpensive, but the train's going to come through not 6 times a day, but 17 times a day, and they're hoping to bring it to 25. What a win for us. You know, we heard, you know, Jesse Reynolds in particular on, you know, the town council debate was talking about, you know, what do young folks look for? Well, you know, that train station is not only a gift for us financially, but in terms of incentivizing development around that train station, you know, we should be going after the developers who we want down there. Look at what Meriden is doing with their downtown. At the cost of nearly zero, all they did was put together a plan. They got together real estate agents, developers, they got together department heads, and they said, what do we want it to look like? What do we want to do with this? And they had the conversation. Their downtown is booming now. We were coming online with the train station at the same time as them. We are behind the 8 ball on this one. We can catch up still. North Haven is now getting a train station. We want to get there first. We need to be planning now. You know, it involves transportation-oriented development. It involves new zoning around there. It involves going out to the developers that we want. You know, all the town has gotten to is the state-mandated plan. They're every 10 years, they're required to get there. And I'll tell you, it lambasted the town for some of the things that it's not doing, and they only did it because they were required to.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yeah, the final statement there is just plain not true. I think he's referring to the plan of conservation and development, which is a required plan every 10 years. In fact, our Planning and Zoning Commission adopted the Housing Incentive Zone at least a year or more ago in order to encourage multi-use and residential redevelopment in the train station area in the downtown. In fact, there is, the Davenport business has moved out, and there is an approved multifamily housing complex being planned for that. In addition, Planning and Zoning is dealing with the transportation-oriented development issue, which will provide a portion of the downtown to encourage pedestrian and other use oriented to the railroad station. So a lot is being done, and certainly we appreciate the investment of the state in that new way of commuting.
Thank you. Matt, would you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
The issue of police department staffing comes up from time to time, and the department is staffed below state averages, but the police chief has said the department's okay with its current staffing. But down the road, do you think the town will reach a point where it needs to take a closer look at adding police staffing, and what factors will you weigh in that decision?
Well, there's always a need to reevaluate. No situation remains the same. The one constant in life is change. So public safety is one of the core services in a community, and we have a duty to constantly evaluate that and make sure we are providing the service that is needed. As you're aware, the department has oriented itself more to a community policing model, and I think that is a major benefit to the entire town. Would we like to have more officers? Well, clearly, you can't be hurt by having more police officers. But again, the issue of affordability is an important one. And at some point, we may have to sacrifice somewhere else in order to provide a greater police presence, should there be the statistics, the events, the change that requires greater police protection. But we are fortunate. We have a safe community, and we are fortunate we have a police department that is not in the paper for reasons that we would not like to have, but they are there because they are actively making the drug arrests, actively taking people who are under the influence off the highway. So it's something that is evaluated on a constant basis. But could it change? Absolutely, it could change. Hopefully not quickly, but it can change.
Mr. Liu.
Well, I want to start by thanking Chief Wright, who is actually in the audience. I think I saw him step out a few minutes ago. His job doesn't stop, right? Here we are at 9:30 at night, and he's coming to candidate forum. So thank you to him and really the dedicated officers. We have a force of 72 doing the work of probably about 100. We are lucky to have such a professional force. When I was asking the chief about, how do we get to an even more robust community policing model? How do we get officers on foot? How do we get them not just being reactive to situations, but following up after something has happened? Maybe they've been the first responder on a scene, and they follow up with someone just to see how their health is doing. How do we get there? And then we really do get to an issue of staffing. And that's a conversation, I think, for the town is that what you want from your police force? I think, look at the reverse side, which is causality. Route 5, 20, 30 years ago, did not look like what it does now. It is now a 24/7 operation, and the reason that affects you as taxpayers is because the chief has had to shift resources away from those community policing efforts that you want and into Route 5.
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
Jared, what ways can the town reduce expenses, whether it's consolidating services or eliminating services?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Luther. It's obviously pretty prescient at the moment. I will actually echo Roxanne McKay last night. I thought she was spot on, and I can see how maybe her platform got confused in the Record Journal, because she was talking about how even in her realm, the school board has gone to the mayor for years looking for efficiency of services. For example, they maintain their own fleet of cars. The town could be doing that at reduced expense, at efficiency of staffing. They've also been going to the town for years simply to try to get toilet paper bought as a consortium of towns, right? It's like going to Costco. If you buy in bulk, you're going to save money. Well, we could be partnering with other area towns to simply buy our toilet paper. We would save a tremendous amount of money. At a time when the state is in financial stress, we can't be wasting money like that. It plays out in other ways. Think about the investment funds. We are consistently 10% below the market rate, which requires us to put more in. Think about the grants that we've misapplied or not applied for at all. Think about the CMEC litigation, where we've spent about $2 million already. Again, we can't be wasting money at this point. So there are many efficiencies that could be created. There are many cost-cutting operations that we should be exploring. And a lot of it really goes back to including more voices.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, I think there certainly can be savings in joint purchases. whatever the difficulties with that, certainly they can be overcome. However, the major costs are very difficult to avoid. The major cost for most town services is the cost of personnel. And I know there's a lot of talk at the state level about regionalizing, but even if you regionalize police departments, you will need a department within the town. Even if you did it for fire department or public works, you name the department, schools, you will still need the teachers, the truck drivers, whatever. So regionalization often does not get you to a lower number of people you are paying to provide the service. And that is where the vast lion's share of the cost is in government. Certainly efforts to share in purchasing, that's fine.
Lila, would you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
What do you see as being one of the largest challenges Wallingford will face coming up in future years, and what steps will you take to reduce these effects?
Well, I think a significant challenge, given the state economy, will be finding the money to be able to afford what we'd like to have. So that is one major challenge. I think another challenge is the loss of business in the state. So even the level of business that we have now on the grand list is being threatened. Bristol Myers is leaving. Bristol Myers paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million. That's $750,000. And at some point after 2018, that money will not be there. So how to attract business becomes a major challenge. There's a flight of people. The population in Connecticut is generally declining. And in the 18 to 24 range, it's a significant flight. Now, in part, that's because I don't think there's the employment in the state of Connecticut. So people are looking for opportunities and they go elsewhere. All of that has to change. Wallingford has to do its part. But we're not an island. We are part of the state of Connecticut, and we need to push the state with our lobbying, with our voice, to adopt rules that will allow some of these to change, some of these hindrances to change. If we're successful in that, then things will improve. But these are all major concerns.
Mr. Liu?
I'm definitely concerned that Bristol Myers is leaving. I don't put that on the town. I think there might have been things we could have done to retain them. I would love to think that the town is going through exit interviews with them right now and finding out what we could have done, what could have gone better, maybe going through a plan for how we help them leave on positive terms. But I largely don't put that on them. One of the things that I am really concerned about, though, and this was brought up earlier, is the declining number of young families. Demographically, we are aging out. And in the mayor's term, what we have done to address that is we are building more apartments for seniors. Well, let's not do that at the expense of building houses for young families. From a data-driven perspective, there hasn't been a house in the $200,000 to $250,000 range that has stayed on the market for more than 30 days in years. We should be going to developers to show them this data, to bring them to Wallingford, to talk to them about our schools and all the innovative things that makes this the place that they want to move in. I'll tell you, I spent years as a risk manager, and from a financial perspective, we are missing out.
Thank you. Matt, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
Jared, you've said in your campaign that you want to see the town get back to producing its own electricity, and I just wanted to see if you could just talk about why you think this is important and how you would go about accomplishing this.
Thanks for raising that, Matt. I think there are a lot of people in Wallingford who don't know that from the time the mayor took over, we were generating electricity, and we actually don't generate electricity anymore. Now, Wallingford was never able to generate enough electricity for the whole town, but that's not a reason to walk away from it. I think what we've seen repeatedly in the town is the way that we've been able to hold taxes low is small tax increase in order to pad the rainy day fund, but we lose a service. And so we can't turn on the Pierce power plants anymore. The town stopped maintaining that years ago, and that's a real loss for the town. From a capacity charge issue, It really doesn't matter how much electricity we generate as long as we generate something. And that's where it begins to be important, because that affects every single person. When your capacity charges are set, if our plant is on, that reduces it for you. I would say, we are generating revenue in town because of the electricity. Lots of different ways to look at it. Certainly they are giving us a contribution of about $1.8 million, but at the same time, they're also using our lines for free. They're sitting on town property. They're not paying rent. So, they're not getting something for nothing. I think there's a conversation there that really encourages them to steer the revenue that they have, the surplus that they have, into renewables. That's actually a selling point for businesses. Most of the major Fortune 500 companies have sustainability goals. And if we are to start generating solar and wind power, that could be a selling feature for Wallingford. So it's a triple bottom line, right? Not only does it bring the businesses to town, not only does it do something better for the environment, but it also saves you money. The mayor's going to tell you that, we cannot build solar for cheaper than we can buy electricity on the grid today. That's true. But it takes years to build these things and put these things in place, and we have to have a plan now so that when that reality shifts, we're ready to go.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, a number of things. The Pierce Power Plant was a peaking plant. It never was in operation on a regular basis since I was elected mayor. It still operates now as a peaking plant. It's leased to CMEC, and a gas-powered turbine produces power. Now, they receive the capacity payments, which we get a credit. Capacity payments are actually an extra charge in all of our electric bills so that plants out there will continue to operate. It's a bizarre system. So we pay more than we should so that the owners of plants receive money just so their plant is in operation. This is the result of a deregulation that occurred in the 90s. So you had to separate generation and distribution at that point. No one company could do that. Since then, Connecticut, the entire Northeast, has been on a downward slide. The South doesn't have this type of thing.
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
Mayor Dickinson, allowing for the fact that single companies that need 1 million square feet don't grow on trees, what is specifically being done to market the Bristol-Myers Squibb property? I mean, we're obviously aware of the issue that's, I think, still currently being litigated, that the Planning and Zoning Commission put a stop to. But what are the specifics of what's being done?
Well, our economic development coordinator specialist, Mr. Ryan, is very active in dealing with brokers, in making sure that the information is internationally available regarding the site and its prime location. So there is great activity with regard to that. As you've stated, there are not a lot of companies that are interested. In part, I believe that's because of a number of factors, one of which certainly is the general cost of electricity in the Northeast. Cost of electricity here is way beyond what you'll find in the southern states. They don't have the same requirements, renewables, the wind, the green, they don't have any of that. The result is businesses go where there's low power costs. Most businesses pay more for power than they do in taxes. So we've got to be smart as a state and certainly in town. Our electric rates are 35% below our competitors, United Illuminating and Eversource. That is why we retain businesses like the Nucor Steel, like Olbrich Specialty Metals, like Holochrome. They came from another city in the state. They're a fastener manufacturer. They came here because they couldn't believe the difference in electric costs. We've got to be smart about that. But the marketing of a given property, we're doing the best we can. We're hoping we will find a company that is interested in moving there. But in the long term, I believe there will be a solution, but it may be a difficult challenge in the short term.
Mr. Liu?
So my concern with the way we do economic development in this town has many prongs. One of the major ones is that the economic development team is a team of one. We're a pretty sizable town. We've got a lot of businesses, and kudos to Mr. Ryan, who is out there just, beating the pavement every day. He needs a team. When Don Rowe retired, we didn't replace his position. I think that was a huge loss. In terms of marketing this town, in terms of writing those grants, in terms of helping our other departments write those grants, we have got to be doing more from an economic development perspective. I think there becomes a secondary conversation is if we can't fill Bristol-Myers, and certainly I don't think we should be changing the zoning that ends up getting us sued by someone else yet again and wasting more in litigation, let's find an exit strategy for them, right? We might not find a buyer. One of the things that I've been looking at is Little League. I've had some really interesting conversations with the Little League who has said that they end up driving back and forth from the east side of town to the west side of town because there aren't the fields on the east side. There could be an answer there.
Thank you. Lila, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
What is the best way to keep in touch with citizens?
Oh, well, let me try to answer your question. I think, the town should be in the business of serving the public. The town shouldn't be doing what is in their best interest. And so when we look at the hours that are open, when town hall is open, we're looking at the hours when many of us are at work. And it becomes inefficient at some point when you think about, maybe I want to buy a house in town and I've got to take a day off from work in order to go down to pull the records and the permits, to look at the different maps. That costs me time, that costs me money. And now multiply that over 5 houses that I might be looking at and it becomes untenable. Think about the business community. They're having to do much more exhaustive searches, and for them to set up shop from 9 to 4 when the office is open, not to be able to do any of it online, to have to talk to someone in person, and there are going to be times when we do have to talk to people in person, but not allowing them to do their due diligence before they get down here. They say, why? I'm just going to go to Meriden, I'm just going to go to North Haven. That's a loss for Wallingford. So let's look at ways that we can communicate with people. Let's look at email. Let's look at setting up forms online where people can report potholes or sidewalks that are cracking in their neighborhood. Let's look at offering weekend hours and maybe trading those off with staff not working on pick a day in the morning. But let's look at times that make it accessible. Let's look at ways that we can serve the public.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Anything's possible, it's just a question of how much you want to pay for it. Because I can tell you there won't be one unionized employee who will want to change any hours, especially if it's evenings or weekends. So you would pay a premium for that. Currently, we do not have a long list of complaints. I mean, telephones are answered all the time. 24 hours a day, you can reach, especially for emergency services, you can reach the party you need. And typically, people need to be able to explain what it is that is their concern. A quick email does not do the job. We need to know much more detail, and we need to know how to get back to someone in a quick way. So when you start talking about putting government records online, I can tell you there are problems in New York City, there are problems in New Hampshire, there are problems where land records are online and fraud develops and lawsuits.
Thank you. Audrey, will you ask the next question of William Dickinson?
When meeting the 21st century job needs that are approaching us, how will you bring jobs into Wallingford, and how will you prepare for this future need through our kids today?
Well, the whole effort is the economic development to make available the information for people to choose a good place to do business. We have an Economic Development Commission that has just received approval from the Town Council with regard to 3 incentive programs regarding taxation and incentives for businesses to come here, invest here with construction, and they get up to 7 years of tax abatements in order to do that. In order to provide the employment, we need the industrial parks, which we have. We have 4 industrial parks. We have utilities in those industrial parks. There are open areas in those parks for others to locate here. So there is a major effort to be responsible, to encourage businesses to locate here and provide employment.
Mr. Liu?
Our kids are competing in the most global marketplace, and if we don't keep up, our kids are going to get left behind. We've talked about education a little bit tonight, and I'm really concerned, again, that if we can't even get to the point where we can be nimble enough to have all-day kindergarten in a timely manner, we're not taking a hard look, and we're not giving the flexibility to the superintendent to do his job and to let his team and the teachers educate our children to compete in the global marketplace. They are doing some innovative things, and I think that is a real testament to them. Things like the partnership that we have with Ulbrich to do management training, the CNA program at Sheehan, the VOAG program at Lyman Hall. One of the most surprising things that I have found on the campaign trail came out of a conversation with Scow, who said, every day we have people who are looking for jobs, and we don't have employers to link them with. And when I went downtown and started talking with many of the businesses, they said, we have jobs, but we don't have people who will go into those. That's a real service the town can be offering to link those.
Luther, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
Jared, as you know, the town of North Haven announced earlier this year that it had secured Amazon coming to the former Pratt & Whitney site. Given that Wallingford already has a distribution center here in town, were you surprised that Wallingford wasn't selected? And do you have any thoughts as to why the town wasn't selected by Amazon?
I am surprised. We are fortunate in Wallingford to have many things that are going for us. We have the convenience of the highways. We have lowish electricity rates. We need to be setting a climate that is more attractive to businesses. And I think that starts with having a conversation. This could play out in any number of ways, but if we were in conversation with Amazon talking about what their needs are, I guarantee they would not have sucker punched Wallingford like that. When we have this philosophy that we don't play well with others, when we sit back and we wait to see who's going to come to us, we get change, but not the change that we desire. So I was shocked by that, certainly.
Mr. Dickinson?
It wouldn't surprise me. I believe they're looking for a much larger site than anything we could offer. These businesses know what they're doing, and they plan very carefully. Certainly there must have been significant different opportunities there, because clearly just our power costs are well below what would be available in North Haven. So, I don't know what the issues might have been, but I'm glad for North Haven. They are redeveloping the Pratt & Whitney site that has been a blow to North Haven's ability to compete.
Thank you. Lila, would you please ask the next question of William Dickinson?
Have you had the chance to look at the bipartisan budget that was just passed today? If so, what are your reactions?
I haven't had a chance to look at the budget. We will have to analyze it and find out what it means for the community. My concern is not just this year, but what will be the result next year as well. We're all familiar with the difficulties at the state level. If they're finding new money, there must be some new taxes somewhere, and we all have to be concerned about what is the sustainability of whatever money now will be coming to the town. I'm glad that there's a budget. I mean, I'm very pleased that there's a budget. Now there's an ability for us to plan and hopefully reach a point that we have some certainty in this year's budget. But again, the next year and the next after that are of significant concern.
Mr. Liu?
I also haven't had a chance to look at it, but I'll weigh in again on the state budget. I think Winston Churchill really had phrased it well when he said that, pessimists see the difficulty in every opportunity, and optimists see the opportunity in every difficulty. This is an opportunity for us. It's not the opportunity that we wanted, it's the opportunity we were dealt with, though. This is a chance to be collaborating with other area towns, to talk to the state about how they have not been able to manage their finances. And I'll give a shout out to Councillor Shortell, who said, he doesn't put it on Molloy. This was that the state has been mismanaging its finances for years. Kudos to him. So this is an opportunity to really talk with other area towns about jointly lobbying the state that let's send less to the state and put more to work locally.
Thank you. Audrey, would you please ask the next question of Jared Liu?
If you could only change one thing about Wallingford, what would it be?
Well, I will say this is a great place to live. I grew up in this town. Some of the things that brought me back are some of the things that I'm really running this campaign on. Things like how the community used to pull together more, how kids used to go around the neighborhood and rake leaves for the elderly, how kids used to know the value of delivering papers and shoveling driveways in the winter in order to make a buck. It used to be a community that really people came out of their houses to support one another more. And I think we still have those citizens in town, but we're shutting them aside. Think about Wallingford Youth Soccer, who has come to the table to say, can we maintain the fields at our own expense? Our athletes are getting injured. We're writing grants to the U.S. Soccer Foundation in order to do some of the maintenance that we're not getting from the town, but they're being turned away. And so, it is something that we are causing at the town level. It's not that the residents have changed, it's that the town is pushing them aside. So I would say that's, if I had to pick one, it's going to come down to let's empower committed citizens to do the kind of work in our community that they inherently want to do. I think it's, there are lots of things that we could go out and talk about, but there's so many things that cost nothing. And we hear again and again from the mayor that, well, it's an issue of how much something costs, and it's hard to make those trade-offs. There are so many things that cost nothing. I hope everyone will go to my website, which is www.jaredliu.com. Probably have about 38 pages of platform ideas, and the majority of them cost $0.
Mr. Dickinson?
As if there's one thing that I would like to change, it would be that more companies would see Wallingford as a good place to invest and provide employment. As I've stated, we make a lot of efforts with regard to those encouragements. In fact, we visit companies. Every year we visit six or so companies, visit with them just for the purpose of telling them who we are, what their issues are and their concerns. One of their prime issues at one point was they can't find people with the right skills. So the result of that was talking with the superintendent and including in the curriculum a program to make sure that our graduates have the skills that the companies are looking for that are now in Wallingford and have difficulty finding people to fill employment.
Thank you. Matt, would you please ask the last question of William Dickinson?
Mayor Dickinson, I'm curious to get your thoughts about, and your opponent's thoughts about the proposed town charter changes. What do you like about it? Is there anything that you wish could be different about the proposed changes?
Well, I think here's again a group of volunteers who put their names and their time out there to provide significant work for the community and try to suggest amendments to our charter to make it operate better for all of us. And I certainly respect that. I think they stayed away from controversial issues. It was more of a house cleaning, technical review, and I think it's a very positive result. So as volunteers, I respect what they did on a technical level. I think they certainly listened to the Corporation Counsel and the legal advice they received. They dotted the I's and crossed the T's, so to speak. So they should be proud of the work product, and I think it is a very viable document with those changes.
Mr. Liu?
So I'll start off by thanking the Charter Commission members as well, and maybe just a broader general thanks. I think, the committed citizens in town who serve on our commissions, it is a yeoman's task, and thank you for taking that on, truly. Maybe two things that I would say on this. I don't have that much time. One is, I think in order for government to be transparent, one of the things they should have done with the vote is they should have separated out the questions. I think we would have had a much clearer process. We would have been much more understanding for where folks stand on each question instead of bundling it together. I think we lose a degree of transparency by doing that. Past that, I would say, as chief executive of town, my role as the mayor would be to follow the law as it is passed, and that's exactly what I would do.
Thank you. That concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Each candidate will now have 3 minutes to make a closing statement. Mr. Liu, will you please begin?
Sure. Well, thank you again to the Wallingford community women. Thank you to our panelists, and particularly thank you to the high school students. I think one of the most destructive forces in this country today is that there's a declining engagement from young folks in citizen activities or in civic activities. So kudos to you all for being here. I would like to close by talking about a real Wallingford legend. For those of you who had the privilege of knowing Liz Mitchell, you'll know why I really feel blessed to have called her my friend. She was someone who I worked with when I was at Choate, and Liz, like me, was a longtime Wallingford resident. She grew up in Wallingford as part of a big family, also attended Holy Trinity Church, and in the way Liz would do, she was so good at steering the conversation, and she may have been the first person who encouraged me to run for mayor many years ago, but it always came with a qualification. She said, you should run for mayor when when he resigns. But over time, that conversation started to shift. See, she was a longtime supporter of the mayor. She was a registered Republican, but like me, she believed that the things that happen in Wallingford have almost nothing to do with national political party issues. And so over time, that conversation became steadily, you should consider running for mayor, really. And gone was the qualification. And it sort of overlapped with Liz being increasingly wistful about things that had changed. She would say things like, well, my father's tailor shop isn't in the downtown anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. Or, oh, I remember when every family in Wallingford used to go to community pool. And she knew I was really active with the trees downtown. And she would say, didn't the downtown look magnificent with all those shade trees? And I think what Liz saw was that we had gotten to a place in the town where we were treating the title of mayor as an authority rather than a responsibility. And, I think Liz would be proud that I'm up here tonight. Like I said, she was one of the first people who encouraged me to do this. And that meant a lot to me, and I think about her a lot when I'm on the campaign trail, because having her support would have meant a tremendous amount to me. But I think she would have been embarrassed that we point the finger too many times. We don't take leadership for the situations that we really should own. And I think she would be embarrassed that fewer and fewer people vote. And so, the last thing I will say is please vote. Please get yourselves educated. We have tremendously talented folks who have stepped up to lead, who have offered their candidacy, who have put their platforms out on websites. Be in touch with them. Please get yourself educated. Please vote. And this one's for Liz.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, Wallingford is a wonderful place to be, and it's because of all of you people here and all of the people who live in the community. The number of organizations that provide direction and help, volunteer, is incredible. Everything from Masters Manna to the Garden Club, to the Conservation Commission, to the Medical Reserve Corps, to the volunteer firefighters. The list goes on and on. That's a spirit in the community that is incredible. As elected officials, it is important that we recognize that and act in a manner that encourages it. I certainly have sought to do that. I think the other thing about being an elected official is you must act as a trustee over other people's money. You must use the care of a fiduciary, a prudent care over other people's assets. They're not mine, they're not the council's, they're not the Public Utility Commission's, they're ours. And that trust cannot be betrayed, because once betrayed, you will never get it back. I take that very seriously. Now, there's another aspect to it. And there was a gentleman who walked to his car in the parking lot and found a big dent in the door. So then he noticed a note on the windshield. The note with a name and a phone number. He telephoned. The person on the line said, "I am so sorry. I hit your car when I was backing out of the parking spot." And he said, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. Our insurance companies will be able to handle this." And she said, "Oh, well, you are so gracious. You're not at all like the gentleman I hit on the way out of the parking lot." There's always a story. There's always something you're not anticipating, and you have to be ready to adapt to it. There's something else that you need to know. At some point you have to act, but you also have to be very cautious about not moving so quickly that you don't understand the full story. Everyone has a role to play. Everyone needs the caring that a good community can provide. That is what I think Wallingford, as all communities, should realize. We will work for that.
Thank you. This concludes the mayoral segment of the 2017 Candidates Forum. On behalf of the Wallingford Community Women, I want to thank you for watching and remind you to please vote on November 7th.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.